Hello guys, good afternoon. Welcome to this series. This is series on mocking and stubbing in Cypress. And in this one, we will be doing Cypress with TypeScript really. But in this series, we're just going to go and dive in and see what exactly is mocking. Actually, before we begin definition, let's talk about brief things. Well, so let's talk about this. Actually, what is leading us to this mocking in today's world, where you have like complex application, especially the web applications and other things that you build these days that have like complex APIs and services behind the scene that you go and call. There is need for actually mocking because sometimes you might be building an application that isn't necessarily going to be consuming all of the services you're developing. You might have an application that is going to go off and then speak to or call external services. Let's take a typical like scenario. Is going to be like a hypothetical scenario. So let's say you're building an application for a city council somewhere in England, and this city council is building an application where they want to be able to like take payment on their web application, probably like let's say council tax. In this case now, this application, as well as other services that you'll be creating within this company, you would also have need to go and talk to, like, for instance, some payment services like Stripe, PayPal, all of these things behind the scene. Well, 9 out of 10, these guys will give you their API, but it comes with some other down things as well, downsides. Some of the things is that they would give you their API and they will tell you, oftentimes they will tell you how many number of times you can hit that API, which means some of these API services they will give you will be rate limited. Not only that, some of these APIs also have like a pay per call. So if you continue to like hit above your limit, you're gonna be able to like make some payment, and all hosts of other problems. And this is where there are so many cases, like I can continue to give you an example, but this is where testing modern application and mocking those external services that you don't have control over comes into play. And in this case, we're going to start this series to talk about how we can actually just do this mocking using Cypress. So as you can see here, it just says an introduction to mocking and subbing in Cypress with TypeScript. But essentially, what we are really saying is just what I've just described. And if you look at this slide here, just talking about, let's say, when testing modern application, especially with complex API interactions, it's often inefficient or necessary to rely on live services really somewhere because those services are actually sometimes they'll give you their prod services as well. Sometimes they may give you their test environment, but you don't have control over that. So if you write a test to rely on their test environments, once they are done with development, they might shut theirs down and your test will be failing. To avoid that, Cypress is bringing this concept of mocking and stubbing using their tools. So let's just go and see how we can do this and things that follows. So what is mocking now? So now we've had an overview on the challenges that you face typically on a day-to-day basis when you want to write tests or do things because you want to be able to like mimic these external services, especially so that in fact, sometimes you should also mock your internal services because so that your application doesn't talk to the real thing. That way you have a control scenario and your application go on to actually your test and application can be developed in such a manner that they would always like work without you spinning up service and then the cost of database and services as well. So, what are these? What is mocking now? So, essentially, just creating a fake version of real object function or service to simulate behavior during test or during app development. Really, you just mock. Oftentimes, is used to track how we use these services, and then again, the second concept here is actually just the stubbing. Stubbing is just like a product of like mocking. In that sense, what I'm trying to say is that um, stubbing is just overriding or replacing a function call or API service custom behavior with a predefined response. So when you mock something, when you make a call to it, a stub will just come back to you essentially. And in Cypress, really, these things are used, as I said earlier, to use to control network requests and speed up the development of your application and writing tests. And these are some of the things that benefits it gives you. But again, so in addition to what I've just said, it sort of makes your test to be faster, and it makes your test to be reliable, and it gives you a control scenario so you can actually just speed things up and develop your system and be able to test your system, even though with a reduced cost of having like live services running behind the scene. And especially in tests, that's where it gives you like isolated tests that you can run, and your tests would always be able to run in a cheaper and faster way. And that's why you should actually do that. So in Cypress, how do you actually do this? There are two things that we need to really talk about, but in today's class, really, we will rely so much on this one called as Cypress intercept. This is just a function in Cypress that provides us the intercept capability. It helps us to actually intercept network requests that is made, especially when you're making requests to things like GraphQL, REST API, and all the services behind the scenes. So this intercept can actually just grab the endpoint, listen to that endpoint, and just whenever a call is fired to that endpoint, to intercept it and then return back a stub for you. And then this one here, which is obviously I'm just mentioning it quickly, is just a spy. This is something just used to a function that you use to monitor how the behavior of the calls you made are just actually doing, really. But in this series, we will not dwell on that spy. So mocking and stubbing, in summary, is that mocking is used to simulate a network response. And these network responses are like API data coming through. And then stubbing is just that mock data coming back to you so you can use them. And then you can then intercept and modify things as they are coming back to you, essentially. And some of the things you can intercept are just like probably your request data. When you're sending it through, you can intercept it and add extra things. Let's say, for instance, an application that is going to make a call to an endpoint service, but it will require some certain types of authentication that you don't want to hard code. When you make this call, you have capability to be able to like add this authentication before sending it. And then as well for the response data, when this data is coming back to you, you can actually manipulate it as well and inject exactly what you want to see. That's what that is. All right, so that's introduction to this really. So let's have a quick like overview, just set up really how to actually just go and do this mocking and stubbing in Cypress. So what do we need to do? The first thing you need to do is to like bootstrap a plain Cypress project. On my series here, on my account on YouTube, there is already a video showing you how to create a Cypress project if you want to do that. Otherwise, you can just use this quickly and just to initialize the repository and install Cypress, and then just put all the like good things you need to actually make it TypeScript dependent. Once you've done that, you can just get a basic project and then just ensure to do your ts init config, which would then give you these basic options here. This would be so sufficient for you to sort of follow along in this course. So the next thing we want to have a look here is the basic sample of how this mocks looks like before we go and have hands-on really. So how does it look like? So let's have a look here. This is a typical scenario that you see on a day-to-day life. Sometimes what people do is that so they just write this describe here and then do it, and then this one is actually the mock itself. So we be able to like set up this intercept talking to a typical like verb here, and then it's going to go to an endpoint, and then when it goes to the endpoint, then we will reply with this. So we just reply, and then here we have status code of 200. So this is saying whenever you hear a request that is going to go to a get that is actually going to get and is going to this endpoint, please intercept it and return this data. That's essentially what it is. It is saying at this point, it doesn't actually fire. All you've just set up is just a trigger that listens, kind of a listener that is sitting there. So once you've done this, now there is this bit here, which is alias, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But what this is doing is simply, you're just like kind of setting this trigger. And once this trigger is set up, it is going to like cache itself here once it executes. And now that you're done with this now, all you're going to do now is to do the test part. This is your test here. You're going to start your Cypress test. So basically here, we're going to open up the home page. In this case, in this application that I have developed, I'll walk you guys through in a minute. But this application I've set up, I need to click to a place that will take me to log in, to type username and password. So in this one, I'll type my username and password and click submit. Once I've done submit, it is at this point that the application itself would actually trigger an API call that would supposedly go to this endpoint. So once it happens, at this point, I am sitting here waiting for it to happen. Once it happens, I would go and confirm that an intercept is coming back. So in this case, you can see that the application is expecting a data in this format. It is going to be expecting this JSON, and this JSON has a first name, last name, email, row, created at, and -v. So in this one, you can see that the first name here is Jen. So I can actually go to the front end of my application and be able to assert that Jane is there and should be visible. I can assert other things, but I've just done this just for simplicity's sake. Other things that the application takes, as you can see, is the row. So you would be able to like treat this data again to put like a user here. And in this case, if you test it as admin, you will see more features on this application, even though we've typed like invalid username and invalid passwords onto the application. It would still be able to, the mock will intercept it because it won't let you make call to the real API. The mock will simply intercept and feed the data you need back to the application so that the application can work. So here are a few basic things I want us to talk about or just level up before we begin the hands-on. The first thing here is this concept here called as aliasing here. So whenever you set up this intercept, as we said a few minutes ago, you're going to be able to set this aliasing if you want to later on be able to do some assertions. And then the second concept I want to talk about is the concept of wait. So when you make this intercept happens, you can wait for it. And whilst you're waiting, you can just wait for it. You can also, while you wait for it, you can also do some assertions as you're waiting for it. And then the third thing I want to talk about is that in addition to like hard coding this data, as you saw before now, so if you go back to the previous one here, you can see that the data has actually been hard coded here. So in addition to that, we can actually use a concept called fixture. The fixture is something that we use, as you can see here as well. It is something that we use to like stop this JSON data, whatever JSON data you are expecting, to stop it somewhere and then have it fed back to you from that file rather than hard coding this here. So you can see that I've just used this fixture here. I've used the fixture here as well. So that's the third concept I want to talk about. And then the last thing I want us to talk about as well is the concept of pattern matching. So oftentimes there are some endpoints that have other things like probably like dynamic values after the actual like the differentiator of that, which is like in this case is the users endpoint users / it could be user 1, user 2, user 3, or it could be something else. But in this case, you don't want to care about whatever happens after this user. You simply just want to be able to like go on and make your calls, whatever that is. But you only care about the base endpoint here, and whatever comes, you want to be able to like match it. In this case, it would match whatever comes after this user. So it could be user 1, user 2, like in the example I'm giving here. Also, there's also pattern matching on the verbs, which is on the method that we're going to intercept. So it could be like a put method, it could be patch, it could be, so you can intercept two things at the same time. So when the application or the test fires for, let's say, get, you catch get, post, put, delete, and things like that. So you catch them together, just anything going to this endpoint that is put or patch, please intercept them. So this is one way of doing it. The second way of doing it using regex, for those that are interested in regex, is this way here. So you can see the only difference is that this is just using like open and close bracket here. But this one with a plus sign at the beginning. But in this one now, it is just using / and / at the end of it. And that's it really. And then this is just using in regex concept. So thank you. That is just what we wanted to talk about quickly on this introduction to Cypress mocking and stubbing. So let's dive in and have a hands-on in the next. Consider subscribing to my channel just to help me grow.